All right, welcome to the deep dive, where we like to get into the nitty-gritty of complex
Oh,
topics.
great.
And you're here because you want to get smart fast, and we're going to try to deliver exactly that today.
Yeah, I think we have a really fascinating deep dive planned.
We do. And this one is a little bit different.
It is,
A
isn't it?
little bit different, but I think super
It's
interesting.
so too.
And we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah.
So today we're looking at a set of actual exam questions
Okay.
from Tribhuvan University,
Interesting.
covering kind of the core disciplines of architecture and engineering.
That's right.
So we have architectural conservation, we have urban design, which we'll talk about the big picture of,
The big picture.
the
Yeah.
fundamental principles of structure, so
Yeah.
structural engineering,
Right.
and the vital systems and building services. So we've got a lot to cover today.
We do. It's sort of like peeking into the curriculum of someone who's going to go out and be a builder of Nepal in the future, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it, and I was like, imagine like someone's listening to this, and then they're taking the exam, and they hear us talking about it.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
But I don't think they allow podcasts in the exam room.
Probably not. I
Yeah.
don't think they do. But it is this idea of like distilling, like what is it that those future builders of Nepal like need to have in their minds?
Yeah, and that's what we're going to try to do. It's not that we're trying to help anyone pass the test,
Yeah, exactly.
but really to pull out what are those
The key concepts.
key concepts and like how they all connect.
I love that. Yeah, it's like getting the cheat sheet to understanding how our built world comes together and why it matters, especially in a place as unique as Nepal.
Right. Okay. So let's start with architectural conservation. And just to set this up, this is a topic that appears in several of the exams that we're looking at. And one thing that jumps out is this emphasis on universally accepted principles of conservation, particularly in the context of Nepal, a place with, an incredible history.
A really long and rich history.
Yeah. So like why do you think preserving these old buildings, these structures is so vital in a place like Nepal?
Well, I think what's fascinating when you consider Nepal is the sheer density of its cultural heritage. I mean, it's woven into the fabric of its cities, it's woven into the landscapes, and it's not just, old buildings, right? It's living links to centuries of, artistic, religious, social traditions.
Right.
So architectural conservation in this context is about, safeguarding a really unique identity, making sure that future generations can still experience and learn from this legacy.
Right.
I mean, think about the intricate wood carvings, the unique pagoda architecture. Those tell a story that would be lost if the buildings weren't cared for.
Yeah, no, totally. And I
It's
mean,
almost a respossibility, I think.
yeah, and one exam actually asks about why these historic buildings fall apart. And it specifically points to things like, the sloping roofs and woodwork issues as problems. So
That's interesting.
what are the inherent, weaknesses in some of these older construction methods?
I mean, I think it's important to remember that traditional methods, while often ingenious, right, for their time and the local climate, they do face long-term challenges.
Right.
Like, for instance, a steep slope roof.
Yeah.
It's great for shedding those monsoon rains.
Yeah.
But the materials can degrade,
Oh.
over decades,
Hmm.
allowing water to seep in, and that can create all sorts of problems.
Totally. Yeah. And then,
And similarly, the beauty of the woodwork,
right.
that also makes it vulnerable to termites, rot, especially in those humid environments.
All right.
So these exam questions are actually highlighting that, there's this practical ongoing battle against the elements, that's part of preserving these treasures.
Right. Yeah. Okay, moving to a little bit of a broader scale here. Several questions focus on the idea of World Heritage Sites and the concept of outstanding universal value, even mentioning the quote unquote 3 pillars.
Oh.
So, what makes a site globally significant?
Well, when we talk about outstanding universal value, it means that a place has either cultural or natural significance that's so exceptional that it transcends national borders, and it has an importance for all people
Oh,
of present and future generations.
okay.
So the 3 pillars usually refer to its integrity, so like how whole and intact the site is, its authenticity, which we'll explore more deeply in a moment, I'm sure,
Yeah, okay.
and the fact that it meets at least 1 out of 10 specific criteria related to cultural or natural significance.
Okay.
So, for Nepal, you can think about the intricate art and architecture of the Kathmandu Valley's Durbar squares.
Right.
That might exemplify that masterpiece criteria.
Yeah. Okay.
It's often one that's used.
Ah, Authenticity, you mentioned.
Yes.
Authenticity.
A tricky one.
A tricky one when you're talking about buildings that are hundreds of years old.
Right, yes.
How do you even define and measure authenticity in a repaired historic structure?
Yeah, well, it's less about a snapshot in time
Right.
and more about the genuine character of the place.
Okay.
So conservationists look at the authenticity of materials. So is the repair using historically appropriate materials and techniques.
Okay.
They consider the authenticity of design.
Okay.
Are the original forms and features respected? Craftsmanship? Are the repairs carried out with a similar skill? And even, the authenticity of setting and spirit.
Right.
So does the building still resonate with its original cultural meaning or use where possible?
Okay.
So it's a holistic assessment.
Right.
And I think there are often debates about where to draw the line.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine.
It's not always so clear-cut.
Okay, so these exams also touch on different levels of intervention in conservation,
Okay.
with the Bhaktapur Development Project as kind of a recurring example.
Yes.
So what are the typical approaches?
So the guiding principle is usually do as much as necessary, but as little as possible.
Right.
So the spectrum ranges from simple maintenance, just to stabilize and prevent further decay,
Right.
to repair of damaged elements,
Okay.
to restoration that might involve putting back missing parts based on evidence,
Okay.
and very rarely reconstruction if a building's almost completely lost.
Right.
Adaptive reuse, finding new compatible uses for old buildings, is often favored because it keeps the building, alive and relevant.
Right.
So the Bhaktapur project likely illustrates a range of these approaches
Right.
applied to an entire historic city.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this was something that I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
There's this critical look at using modern materials in conservation.
Okay.
And they specifically reference the Keshav Narayan Chowk and Chiasin Mandap
Interesting.
as kind of examples. And you would think that.
Like newer is always better, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
New materials are going to be better than old materials. So.
It's not always the case, though.
Yeah. Why is that?
So while modern materials might offer advantages, in terms of strength or cost, they can also have drawbacks when used on old buildings.
Okay.
So there could be issues of compatibility with the traditional materials.
Right.
So a modern concrete might not breathe the same way as a historic brickwork, potentially trapping moisture and causing damage.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there are aesthetic considerations, too. A shiny new material might just look really jarring against a weathered, historic surface.
Right.
So cases like Keshav Narayan Chowk and Kiasan Mandap likely involve this really careful consideration of these trade-offs, maybe even instances where modern interventions had unintended consequences or sparked debate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's a
balance.
it's a delicate balance for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, zooming out a little bit, what are the essential components of a good heritage management plan as kind of outlined by these questions?
Yeah, you can think of it as a long-term care strategy for a historic place, right?
Okay.
So key elements include a deep understanding of the site's history and significance.
Oh.
Why is it important? Clear conservation policies that guide all interventions.
Right.
Strategies for regular maintenance and necessary repairs, guidelines for managing tourism, and any new development to minimize impact.
Right.
And crucially, ways to involve the local community and other stakeholders in the process.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, too, that they mention conservation efforts during different historical periods in Nepal,
That's fascinating.
even going back to the medieval period.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, did people back then think about preserving older structures?
It's a good question, yeah. While they might not have had the same formal frameworks
Right.
we do today, there's evidence that past rulers and communities in Nepal did value and maintain, older religious and significant structures. Their
Right.
motivations might have been, religious, political, or just a recognition of the craftsmanship and cultural importance.
Right.
But understanding these historical approaches can inform our modern practices.
Right, right. Yeah, okay. Here's a very practical point that's highlighted in one of the questions. The importance of building codes and regulations for heritage sites, and it specifically mentions the Ancient Monument Preservation Regulation 2064,
Oh, yeah, that's important.
issued by the Nepal government. So why are these legal frameworks so crucial, do you think?
Well, these regulations actually provide the teeth
Oh, cool.
for conservation efforts. So they establish those legal protections for designated heritage sites.
Okay.
They outline procedures for any alterations or repairs.
Right.
And they set penalties for unauthorized damage or demolition.
Okay.
So the Ancient Monument Preservation Regulation 2064 provides a consistent legal basis for protecting Nepal's rich architectural heritage across the country.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about kind of the how and the what of conservation,
Right.
but like what about the why?
The why, yeah.
What fundamental values are we trying to protect when we conserve a site?
Yeah, I mean, this gets to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
So the value of a historic site can be, multifaceted.
Yeah.
It might have historical value. It tells us about the past.
Right.
Architectural value,
Yeah.
showcasing design and craftsmanship.
All right.
Cultural value, it's associated with traditions or beliefs.
Right.
Aesthetic value, it's simply beautiful.
Right.
And increasingly, we're recognizing its social and economic value. It can contribute to tourism, local identity.
Right.
So recognizing these different types of value helps us make more informed decisions about
Right.
which sites to prioritize and how to care for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, thinking about the economic value. I was just in Mexico City,
Oh, yeah?
and I went to Teotihuacan.
Oh, wow.
And, it's like a huge
Right.
tourist
Yeah.
destination.
Yeah.
So there's clearly a lot of economic activity
Right.
surrounding these sites. So,
Exactly.
it's not just about preserving the past, it's about,
Right. Yeah, the living aspect of it.
yeah. Okay, finally on conservation, the role of inspection is emphasized, and it specifically talks about the 2072 BS earthquake and the need for inspection after that devastating event. So what's the focus of these inspections?
Well, sadly, the earthquake demonstrated the vulnerability of even historic structures.
Right.
So post-disaster inspections are vital for immediate safety assessments, identifying structural damage, planning emergency repairs.
Right.
But also, those ongoing inspections
Right.
are crucial for preventative maintenance, spotting early signs of decay,
Right.
ensuring the long-term stability of these irreplaceable places.
Right. So it's not just about the immediate crisis, it's about the long game.
Exactly, yeah, the future resilience of that heritage.
Right. Okay, let's shift our focus to urban design insights.
Okay, look.
And these exams highlight, fundamental principles like density, diversity, and mixed-use development.
The big three, yeah.
So why are these considered the building blocks of good urban design?
Well, think about creating vibrant and livable, sustainable cities.
Right.
Density, when well managed, allows for efficient use of land and infrastructure, reduces sprawl. Diversity, so like a mix of housing types, businesses, and cultural activities,
Right.
creates more dynamic and resilient communities where people can live, work, and play.
Right.
And then mixed-use development,
Right.
where you integrate different functions within the same area or even the same building. It reduces the need for long commutes and fosters walkable neighborhoods.
Right.
So it's about creating places that are active and engaging throughout the day.
Yeah. It's so interesting thinking about these principles because, having lived in a city
Yeah.
like New York City,
Yeah.
which has, obviously very high density
Right.
and is, I think, very good at mixed-use development.
Yeah, it does it well.
It makes me wonder, like, why can't more cities do this?
Right. It's a good question. Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to planning, right?
Right.
Vision and long-term investment in infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah.
It's definitely doable, but it takes commitment.
Yeah. Okay, so the value of urban design is explored in a couple of these questions.
Yeah.
And specifically mentioned are things like, urban pattern and urban fabric
Okay.
and their connection to, infrastructure and amenities. So how does thoughtful urban design actually improve our lives?
Yeah, it's fascinating how the physical layout of our cities directly impacts our daily experience.
Right.
The urban pattern, that network of streets, blocks, and open spaces that dictates how easily we can move around,
Right.
how easily we can access services,
Right.
the urban fabrics, the character of buildings, and how they relate to the street
Right.
influences the look and feel of a place, affecting social interaction, that sense of community.
Right.
Good urban design makes sure that essential infrastructure like water, sanitation, transportation can be efficiently provided,
Right.
and that amenities like parks, schools, shops are accessible to everyone.
Right, right. Yeah, and this, just makes me think back to that
Yeah.
trip to Mexico City, where, you see examples of good urban design and bad urban design.
Right, it's all mixed in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so one question delves into urban morphology
Okay.
and its role in planning new towns based on, existing settlement patterns.
Interesting.
So what exactly is urban morphology?
Urban morphology is essentially the study of the physical form of cities
Okay.
and how they evolve over time.
Right.
It looks at street layouts, the size and shape of buildings and plots, and the historical processes that shape them.
Okay.
So understanding the underlying logic of existing settlements, So why they developed the way they did
Right.
can provide valuable lessons for planning new towns that are well integrated with their context, efficient in their use of land, and responsive to, cultural and environmental conditions.
Right.
So think about how traditional Newari settlements
Okay.
in Nepal are often organized around communal courtyards. That's a key aspect of their urban morphology.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay. And then,
It's really fascinating,
yeah, yeah.
like how these patterns
Yeah.
repeat themselves over time
Yeah.
and are adapted to different contexts.
Yeah. Okay. Several questions touch on the idea of what makes a great place in a city and how to achieve quote unquote placemaking.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Even referencing the Kathmandu Valley
Oh, yeah, yeah,
as an
yeah.
example. So, what are some of the, secret ingredients of a successful urban space?
Well, it raises a really important question.
Yeah.
What makes us feel connected to
Right.
and comfortable in a public space?
Right.
It's often a combination of factors.
Yeah.
Walkability, a variety of things to see and do,
Right.
a strong sense of local identity,
Yeah.
opportunities for social interaction, and a connection to the history and culture of the place.
Right.
So placemaking is the art and science
I'm sorry.
of intentionally designing and managing those public spaces
Right.
to maximize these qualities. So in the Kathmandu Valley, that might involve revitalizing those historic squares,
Mm-hmm.
creating pedestrian-friendly zones, celebrating those local festivals and traditions in public spaces.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay. Public open spaces keep coming up.
They're important.
They're important. So the exams discuss kind of their necessity, different types,
Okay,
and they also talk about their role in making streets more pedestrian friendly.
right.
So why are parks and plazas so vital in a city?
Well, public open spaces are truly the lifeblood of a city.
Okay.
They provide essential areas for recreation, relaxation, social gathering,
Right.
even environmental benefits like absorbing stormwater, cooling the air.
Right.
Different types of open spaces serve different needs.
Okay.
And importantly, those well-designed public spaces can make walking more enjoyable and safer
Right.
by providing those attractive routes, places to rest, a break from the traffic.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. I think especially in dense urban areas,
Yeah, it's a refuge.
they're, yeah, a refuge, a place to escape.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Mass transportation and pedestrianization are kind of linked in these questions.
Oh, interesting.
So how do these work together to create a better urban environment?
Well, they go hand in hand, I think.
Okay.
So efficient and reliable mass transit reduces the need for private cars,
Right.
which in turn can free up that street space and make pedestrianization more viable and appealing.
Right.
When people have good public transport options, they're more likely to walk for those shorter distances,
Right.
especially if the walking environment is safe, pleasant, and interesting.
Right.
It's about creating that virtuous cycle
Yeah.
where sustainable transportation options support a more walkable and livable city.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Finally, in urban design, there's a mention of urban subdivisions,
Okay.
movement systems, and the image of the city.
Interesting. Okay.
So why are these key elements to consider when shaping a city?
Absolutely. So urban subdivisions, so how the land is divided into those individual plots, directly influence the density
Okay.
and the form of development. Movement systems, so the network of roads,
Mm.
public transport, pedestrian paths,
Right.
determine how easily people and goods can move around.
Right.
And the image of the city.
Its overall visual character and how it's perceived contributes to its identity, its attractiveness to residents and visitors, and that sense of pride people have in their city. So all these elements need to be carefully planned and integrated
Right.
to create a functional and appealing urban environment.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears again. Delve into structural engineering principles.
Okay, a little more technical now.
A little more technical, yeah.
I like it.
So these exams cover gravity and lateral loads in Nepal. What are the main forces that buildings have to stand up to?
Well, in Nepal, famously prone to earthquakes.
Yeah.
Buildings must be designed to resist both gravity loads, so the everyday weight of building, its occupants, its contents,
All right.
and lateral loads,
Yep.
which are primarily caused by seismic activity, but also wind forces.
Okay.
So gravity pulls things down, vertically,
Yeah, right.
and lateral forces push from the side.
Right, yeah. Okay, and earthquake-resistant design is understandably a major focus.
Of course, yeah. So what are some of the core ideas behind making a building resilient to shaking?
So the fundamental goal is to design buildings that can withstand ground shaking without collapsing, even if they sustain some damage.
Okay.
So key principles include providing sufficient strength to resist the forces,
Okay.
ensuring adequate stiffness to limit excessive deformation,
Okay.
and crucially, incorporating ductility, the ability of the structure to bend and deform without fracturing.
Okay.
So avoiding irregular shapes and weaknesses that could concentrate stress is also vital,
Okay.
as is careful detailing of how different structural elements connect.
Okay, and you mentioned irregular shapes. And,
Yeah.
the exams briefly touch on different types of structural irregularities.
Yeah.
So, what are some common examples and why are they a red flag?
These exams often highlight the what they call a soft story irregularity,
Okay.
where one floor, typically the ground floor, with large open spaces for parking or shops, is significantly less stiff
Right.
than the floors above it. Other irregularities include abrupt changes in mass or shape as you go up the building.
Right.
These unevennesses can lead to a concentration of those seismic forces in the weaker parts,
Okay.
making them more vulnerable to collapse.
Right, right. Okay, the center of mass and center of rigidity
Yeah.
are also discussed in the context of lateral loads. So, what do these terms mean and
Yeah.
why are they important?
So the center of mass
Yeah.
is the point where the entire weight of the building can be considered to act.
Okay.
The center of rigidity is the point around which the building tends to rotate
Right.
when subjected to those lateral forces.
Okay.
So ideally, those 2 points should be as close together as possible.
Okay.
If there's a significant separation, it can induce those torsional forces
Okay.
during an earthquake,
Right.
causing the building to twist violently and potentially suffer more severe damage.
Right, right. Okay, shear walls and moment resisting frames.
Oh yeah, big players in earthquake design.
Yeah, so tell me about those. What are the basic functions of each?
Shear walls are these vertical, wall-like structural elements,
Okay.
specifically designed to resist lateral forces like earthquake shaking and wind.
Okay.
They work by transferring those forces down to the foundation.
Yeah.
Moment-resisting frames, on the other hand, are structural frameworks
Okay.
made up of beams and columns connected in a way that allows them to resist those forces through bending in the beams and columns
Huh.
and at their connections.
Okay.
So both systems provide lateral stability, and they can be used independently or together.
Okay. Okay. So they're both about resisting that
That sideways force.
sideways force. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Ductile detailing in reinforced concrete structures is also brought up for earthquake resistance. So what does this involve?
So reinforced concrete is concrete with those steel reinforcing bars embedded in it.
Okay.
Ductile detailing refers to specific ways of designing and constructing these RC elements.
Okay.
The amount and placement of the steel, how it's tied together, the confinement of the concrete, to ensure those structural members can undergo significant deformation without suddenly breaking.
Okay.
So this ability to deform or be ductile allows the building to absorb and dissipate energy during an earthquake, making it much more resistant to collapse.
Okay. Okay. So it's all about how you build it, not necessarily just what you build it out of.
Yeah, it's those little details, the connections, that really matter when it comes to earthquake resistance.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay. Finally, in the structural section, basic wind speed and design wind pressure are mentioned. So how do engineers factor in the force of wind?
Well, they start by determining the basic wind speed for that specific location
Okay.
based on historical weather data, and then they use various factors that account for the building's height, shape, its surrounding environment, how exposed it is, and the importance of the building
Right.
to calculate that design wind pressure.
Right.
So this pressure is the force that the building structure must be able to safely resist.
Right. Right. Okay. Let's move on to building services.
All right, the systems that make buildings work.
Yeah, and these exams begin with psychrometric processes. So can you tell us what those are?
Psychrometrics is the study of the properties of moist air, so things like temperature, humidity, enthalpy.
Okay.
Psychrometric processes involve changing these properties, for example, heating air, cooling air, adding or removing moisture.
Okay.
Understanding these processes is absolutely fundamental
Okay.
to designing effective HVAC systems,
Right.
so heating, ventilation, and air conditioning.
Right.
They create comfortable, healthy, and energy-efficient indoor environments.
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. And fire safety is clearly a concern. So there are questions about fire extinguishers and firefighting hydrant components.
Yeah, fire safety is essential.
It is essential. What are some of the key things to know?
So it's crucial to understand that different types of fire extinguishers are designed to tackle different kinds of fires.
Right.
Class A for ordinary combustibles, Class B for flammable liquids, Class C for electrical fires, and so on.
Right.
Using the wrong extinguisher can make things worse.
Right. Right.
Fire hydrants are essential for providing that large, reliable water supply for firefighters.
Okay.
Knowing those different parts of the hydrant and how they work is vital for ensuring effective fire suppression.
Right, right. Okay, vertical transportation in high-rise buildings is also covered, asking about the systems used and the importance of their grouping. So what are the common ways that people move up and down in tall buildings, and why does grouping matter?
The primary systems are elevators,
Yeah,
escalators, and sometimes moving walkways.
right.
In high-rise buildings, efficient grouping of elevators is critical
Oh, okay.
to minimize wait times and manage traffic flow.
Right.
This often involves dividing the building into zones with separate groups of elevators serving different sets of floors.
Right.
Good grouping reduces congestion and improves the user experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this from like a user's perspective. When you get in an elevator,
You just want to go where you need to go.
you just want to go where you're going and not have to wait forever or go to the wrong place.
Absolutely,
Yep.
and especially in a really tall building.
Right, right, yeah.
Efficiency is key.
Okay. Energy audits are also mentioned. So what is an energy audit and what are the typical steps involved?
So an energy audit is a systematic assessment of how energy is used in a building or facility.
Okay.
The goal is to identify opportunities to save energy and reduce costs.
Right.
The process typically involves several phases.
Okay.
First, planning and collecting data on current energy consumption.
Okay.
Then a site visit to inspect the building systems and identify areas of potential loss.
Okay.
Then analysis of the data to quantify energy use and potential savings.
Okay.
Then identifying and evaluating specific energy-saving measures.
Right.
And finally, preparing a report with those findings and recommendations.
Okay, so it's a whole
Process.
process. The whole process, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Coordination of services during building construction is emphasized.
Oh, yeah. That's so crucial.
Why is it so vital for all the different teams to work together?
Well, modern buildings are incredibly complex,
Yeah.
involving all these interconnected systems, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection,
Right.
and more.
Right, right.
So effective coordination among the architects, engineers, and various contractors is essential
Okay.
to prevent clashes between different systems, ensure that everything fits together correctly, maintain the project schedule, the budget, and ultimately deliver a functional and safe building.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can imagine if the left hand isn't talking to the right hand.
Yeah, big trouble.
Big trouble, yeah.
Exactly.
The basics of air conditioning
Okay.
and calculating cooling loads.
Important in a place like Nepal.
Yeah. So give us a quick overview.
So air conditioning systems work by removing heat and humidity from indoor air
Okay.
to create that comfortable environment.
Right.
Calculating that cooling load
Yeah.
involves determining the total amount of heat that needs to be removed from a space to maintain that desired temperature.
Hmm.
This calculation takes into account factors like the building's orientation, insulation, window size and type, occupancy levels, and the heat generated by lights and equipment.